we're going to be in a folk band.
No,
I forgot my guitar.
I forgot to learn how to play a guitar. Am I,
Are we on? Mary Kay,
yeah.
congratulations on your new New York Times bestseller. I'm so excited to be here with you, one of my favorite people, one of my inspirations.
Oh, I don't believe it.
A badass. A badass.
Badass, I'll say that.
It's true. And welcome to New York.
Thank you. This is my first time
You-
doing an event in Long Island. What a... I had a little travel hiccup today, and so they had to, I was supposed to pick up a rental car at LaGuardia, drive out with my daughter-in-law, who's my substitute roadie for this part of book trip. And the plane was delayed, so my publisher got me a car, and the car picked me up, and I was coming through town, and I was like, I passed at least 4 thrift stores. You're lucky that I did not tell that car to go.
But you experienced the drive out to the east end of Long Island on a Friday in summer,
Yes.
which is everyone's favorite
And
experience.
see, since I'm such a noob at this, I had no idea what we were asking you to do. So anyway, thank you.
I would have gone
And thank you
way
to
further.
all of you who came from wherever you came from.
So let's talk about, speaking of road trips, let's talk, I'm now very, very good friends with the man who drove the car out here. Let's talk about this book, and let's talk about, there's so many things we're gonna get into, but I know who has read this book? So, okay, good. So we're not gonna spoil it at all. But we are going to talk, we're going to tell you a little bit about it. This is a book that is about sisters, and it's about family secrets, and it's about Ireland, and it's about a road trip. And I'd love to tell everybody how all those things come together, and then we're going to get into the bits and pieces of it.
Okay. First I have to check to make sure my daughter-in-law isn't lost. I feel my phone checks me. Normally I would not do this, but...
I forgot my guitar, or we,
So how does it all come together? Gosh, I've been on book tour for 12 days, and I still haven't figured out a great, snappy elevator pitch pattern. So 2 sisters who were born and raised in Savannah, Georgia, Therese and Maeve Dunnigan, from a working class Irish Catholic family. Savannah has a huge Irish population, and that's because after the Civil War, the Irish came south, a lot of them, and they came from Boston, and they came from New York, and they came from Philly, and they came from Chicago, and they came to work on the railroads in Savannah and also to work in the port. And a lot of them ended up working in the port as longshoremen, and so it was sort of an old boys club. For many years, and I think it's only changed recently, you couldn't get a job in the port unless you were Irish. That's how they rolled. So I started with these 2 sisters, Maeve and Therese, and their family, as I mentioned, is Irish. Their dad died when they were young. Their mom, Mary Helen, raised them, and she worked managing her brother-in-law's drugstore. The sisters have long been estranged. They're just as different as they can be. And when I came up with them, I knew that Maeve was the younger sister. I wanted to flip the family dynamic cliche. So Maeve, even though she's the younger sister, is the rule follower, the caretaker, and she's been teaching English at a university in Savannah. But she's moved in with her mother, Mary Helen, during her last illness. Therese, on the other hand, is the prodigal daughter. She's a Rolling Stone. She's an actress who blew the dust of Savannah off of her sandals right after high school and beat feet to make a living for herself, acting, not always very successfully. And so the family dynamic I wanted to write about was these 2 estranged sisters and how different they are. And I wanted to explore that a little bit. I am the middle of 3 sisters, and my father's family were Irish immigrants, who came over to Ellis Island around the 19-teens and 20s, and never talked very much about Ireland. So we never knew much about the life they left behind. And I've always been curious about that. The thing that, there's a plot device in this book. It's like a MacGuffin or a Maltese Falcon. You know, I started my fiction career writing mysteries. And so the idea of a MacGuffin always fascinated me. A MacGuffin, if you don't read mystery, is just an article that you think the book is really about, but maybe it's not. In this case, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So there's a portrait, and it is of, it's been in the Dunnigan family since forever. Mary Helen's always told them. It's a beautiful portrait of a very aristocratic looking lady. Mary Helen tells them that she is Lady Geraldine President Fitzhugh Rossington, and that she is their ancestor, and she's Anglo-Irish aristocracy. And that the portrait was painted by a very famous listed artist, and that it is the girl's legacy. And of course, Mary Helen, their mom, is what we politely call a fabulist. Mm-hmm. And you know what a fabulist is. It's a liar. My mother, and Mary Helen is a little bit inspired by my mother, was a fabulist. She just loved to make up shit.
She kept it interesting, I think is what you're trying to say.
She did. And I don't think she ever really expected anybody to believe some of her shit. But, you know, when you're a little kid, there were pictures of my mom on a beach in a black bathing suit when she was 17. This would have been the early 50s. And in one picture, she's wearing a pageant sash. And so she told us that she had been Miss Kentucky in the Miss America pageant. So we took that, my sisters and I took that photo to school, and proudly at show and tell told the class, my mommy was Miss Kentucky in the Miss America pageant. Totally a lie. She got to ride in a float in a local parade.
Well, truth is really relative.
Well, my mic just exploded. I think probably that's where I got my penchant for storytelling.
Is it also where you got your penchant for researching the truth for journalism?
Yeah, I think it's funny. I went from trying to be a stickler about being accurate and writing truth in newspaper stories, and then one day waking up and saying, I really want to make up lies.
But is it, so I'm going to press on that, because that's one of the things that I think is really fascinating about your career. And you're not, there are often, when you've been meeting writers, for fiction writers, long enough, you realize there is a certain, it is not a small percentage of fiction writers who actually do come from journalism.
Oh yeah, there are tons of us.
And I think, could you talk a little bit about why that makes such sense?
Well, I think for one thing, when you're a journalist, especially if you're working on a daily publication, as I did the last 10 years of my career, you're trained to write on deadline. You can't wait for the muse. You're going to get it, you're going to get it down and dirty if you have to, but the presses at the time, before digital, the presses roll at a certain time. So and there's an editor standing over you, tick-tock, tick-tock. And the other part of it is you're used to understanding story structure. And story structure is pounded into your head, whether you go to journalism school or not. Every news story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Every good newspaper story has a hook that draws you into the story. And the other part of journalism is it teaches you to listen, because if you're a good journalist, you want to be accurate. And you want to get to the truth of the matter. So you're listening very carefully, you're writing it down, but you're also, if you're a good journalist, you're watching the person you're interviewing, because you're watching their body language, and you're observing your surroundings. And when I was a baby newspaper reporter, I can remember being stunned that adults would look me in the face and lie to me. And that was a revelation, because I thought if you ask someone a question, you're a newspaper reporter, they're going to tell you the truth. And I was quickly just surprised of that notion. People will lie. They do lie. They look you right in the face and lie. And so it's helpful to get a fix on people, to read them, and also to do your research. So it's not good enough for someone to say, no, I did not have insider knowledge because I'm a congressman, and buy up all the bank stock because we were fixing to deregulate it.
For example, spitballing here.
I think the discipline journalism demands, and the idea of story structure, and the attention to detail are all part of what helps make a novelist. And also, and a lot of people who start writing fiction, and you know about this yourself, Sarah, a lot of people who write fiction really bristle at the idea that someone can edit them. They don't understand that there should be and needs to be someone with a red pen crossing things through and saying, no, this doesn't work, or saying, explain that, or this is not necessary to a story. So knowing that a good editor, and I didn't have a whole lot as a newspaper reporter, I had some, but knowing the value of a good editor and understanding that writing a story, what do you think? Do you think it demands a
1,000%.
collaborative?
And I think there's something, I've not been a journalist, but I do think the value of an editor to a book or a story or anything is having somebody who understands what you're trying to do. You're rowing in the same direction.
Right.
The worst. I've had several editors in my life. The worst one is one who was also a novelist, because she was. Every story I sort of pitched, or every sentence felt like, well, if she were going to write this story, it would be her thing,
right?
Whatever her thing was. And so I think that in journalism, you're rowing in the same direction.
Hopefully.
Yeah,
but sometimes you get an editor who wants, what we used to say, put their feet all over your story. They want to put their imprint on your story, just to make me insane. I had an editor who would inject her own adjectives in a story I wrote. And I'm like, bet you weren't there. You don't know.
So, okay, let's get to Ireland then, because I feel like the book is about these sisters. They discover this portrait, or there is a portrait with lore.
Right.
Their mother dies. This is not a spoiler. It happens on page 1.
Yeah.
And they are headed together. They are sort of told, like, this is your inheritance. Suffer with each other.
Yeah, their mother.
I love siblings who suffer.
Their mother has left them a coffee can full of $20 bills. She saved back from her paycheck every week for 30 years, as women of a certain age did, and she's left instructions that she wants her daughters to take this money. She has no idea what a trip to Ireland costs. She wants them to take this money and take a road trip to Ireland to sort of explore their family roots, but more importantly, to heal this rift, this long simmering rift between the sisters. And that's her bucket list death wish. And so these sisters don't even want to go across the street with each other. But now,
so now they fly to Ireland.
Yeah, that's a great trope in romance fiction, forced proximity. But in this case, it's forced proximity.
Enemies to lovers.
Yeah, it really is enemy to lovers. Only they're sisters.
Yeah.
So they go to Ireland, and they're trying to find out the truth about this portrait. Is there any possibility? And Maeve is convinced there's no possibility this portrait could be real. Now, I should back up and say that Therese has found a newspaper article with a picture. It's an article from the New York Times talking about this portrait that was just auctioned off at Sotheby's for $1.2 million. And there's a picture in the paper, in the New York Times, of this portrait, and it's theirs. It's their same portrait. So Therese thinks this means, by God, we're rich. And May points out to her, no, there's just the one portrait. And Sotheby's, would have checked out the provenance of something like this. Or, this ain't Antique Roadshow. They would have checked this out.
Mary Kay's Sunday afternoon.
So Maeve wants to disprove that her sister could have that it could be right, and Therese wants to prove that she absolutely is right, and that's they're butting heads as sisters do.
So you send them to Ireland.
I do.
And you call up, Mary Kay, in real life.
Yes.
Call up your buddy and
Yes.
you say, let's go to Ireland.
I do. I have a friend in Savannah, and she traveled to Ireland several times. Her last name is Kelleher, so you can imagine. And she was willing to drive in Ireland, which was key, because nobody wants me driving on the wrong side of the road. So I had done some research ahead of time. Part of my road trip was to research the book and figure out the plot of this book. But there was also a hidden agenda, which was to see what I could find out about my father's family. And I didn't realize what I was doing until I was done. But what I realize now is that I totally discarded my father's story. I wasn't interested in the patriarchal.
Well, tell everybody about your father's mother first.
Yeah, so my father's mother's name was Mary Ellen Sherlock. And she and her sister were orphaned, and they were raised on a farm in County Armagh, a village, I think it's called Burr, and it's near Offaly. And my cousins, who had done some research ahead of time, said there's a saying over there, it's where God left his shoes, which means it is in the middle of nowhere. And so really what we knew was that Mary Ellen and her sister left their village in the teens, early 20s. They went to what was then called Queenstown on the west coast of Ireland, and that town is now called Cobh, C-O-B-H, and it was the port of debarkation for probably the majority of the Irish immigrants who came to the U.S., this great wave of Irish immigrants between the years of about the 1860s, after the potato famine, all the way through the 1930s. And during that great wave, between 3.5 and 5 million Irish left Ireland and most of them came to the United States, some came to Australia. And my grandmother and her sister Bridget were in that number. We knew that we found the ship's manifest. We knew that she'd come over on a ship called the Cedric. The Cedric was a White Star Line ship. And if you know anything about your history, you know that the Titanic was a White Star Line ship. We knew that she arrived in steerage, which is where most of the poor, penniless Irish rode. And she had, I think I saw something on one of the manifests that she had like 5 pounds. She came to Ellis Island and eventually made her way to Chicago. I've always been told her fare was paid for by the man whose house she went to work for in Chicago. And my one memory of her was her telling me that she worked in the kitchen, the Irish girl working in the front of the house. And that was pretty much the attitude of the time. At some point she met my grandfather. He came over 2 years later than she did, but also on the Cedric. So really that's the bare bones of what we knew. So I decided I would take Mary Ellen, my grandmother's story, as the starting point for a character that you meet in the prologue to the book. And she is Kathleen Connor. She is Maeve and Therese's great-great-grandmother. She's been orphaned. She's 18 years old. And as a young child, before she's orphaned, as a young child, she is plucked from her family who live on a tenant farm in the village of Terrymore. And a member of the Rossington family, Lord and Lady Rossington, their old maid sister, Lady Rossington, plucks Kathleen from their family, from this family, and takes her to live at the estate and tells her mother she'll come to live with us and she'll be given all the best, she'll be educated, and we'll even let her practice her Catholic faith. So now at the beginning of the book, things have changed radically. Lord Rossington has recently died. Lady Fiona is kicking Delia to the curb, and Delia realizes, and there are 2 sons in the family, and Delia is uneasy about the way those sons are looking at Kathleen, who's 18 and beautiful. So at the beginning of the book, she tells Kathleen, she takes her to this portrait gallery and stands her in front of this portrait of Lady Geraldine Cressida Fitzhugh Rossington. Tells her, this is your grandmama. No matter what anybody says for the rest of your life, you should know you come from quality. And then she proceeds to cut the portrait out of the frame, roll it up, and give it to Kathleen and say, and now you're going to America. So that the portrait comes into play there, and then we're hopefully off to the races.
Yeah. I want to come back to your grandfather, though, which is where you were going before I cut you off. But I also want to say there's lots of time for questions, so please start thinking about your questions. Your grandfather.
Yeah.
You said you got to Ireland and you didn't realize what you were really going to do there, or what you would learn there.
Yeah, I realized, and it wasn't until I started, at some point, let's talk to you about where your research takes you.
I mean, fine, but let's do it.
I had done some research. I had found the portrait that I saw that sold at auction in Atlanta. There was a portrait that sold at an auction house in Atlanta that started this whole story in my head, of a beautiful aristocrat, Anglo-Irish aristocrat. Portrait sold in Atlanta for $400,000. And I wondered, and it was of an Irish woman named Una Guinness. Una Guinness was one of the fabulous Guinness sisters of the Guinness brewing dynasty. And her father had this portrait painted for her as a wedding gift, and he gave her the portrait and this fabulous estate called Lugala in the Wicklow Mountains of Ireland. And immediately I thought, how did a portrait come from this fabulous estate, Lugala? How did it end up in an estate in Atlanta? It sold for $400,000, ain't chump change, and I want to know the story behind that. And so I started looking into it. And I thought, okay, this portrait, this is my MacGuffin. And you can't tour Lugala, it's privately owned now. And I thought, well, I'll go to Ireland, and we'll go to the area near where Una Guinness's house was. I found an estate called Rusborough House. It's owned by the National Trust now. It had been deeded over to the trust by the family, and there's an inn on the property where we stayed, and then we toured the estate, and that's really what I was after. I wanted to tour the estate so I could get a feeling for what Kathleen's home looked like, and I needed to see what the landscape was like, and I just trusted to the gods that the plot would unfold somehow. Tell me about your experience with that. Stop staring at me! I'm trying to draw you in like a good conversation partner. She's giving me this dead-ass stare.
I'm fascinated by you.
No, you're not.
I mean, but I am, because yes, I recently wrote a commercial novel set in 2025, but mostly I write historical fiction, and so research is all I ever want to talk about. And so it feels to me, this is so familiar to me, like, oh, I have to go to England.
Right.
For work. And then you get there and you spend the day in Covent Garden, and you meet a guy whose grandfather sold ice on the street, was an ice seller, And then you think, okay, well, that's a story. And I think that's the thing, you know, people often ask, where do you get your ideas? Literally everywhere. Everyone, everywhere. You tell me half a sentence, you drop a painting in the newspaper, and suddenly there's a whole book.
Yeah.
But I do think, and I'm sorry, I'm going to put it back on you, because I already wrote my book. But I do think that there is something really special when you're writing a book and suddenly it shows you something about yourself. Like it unravels something about your life, your family, your world that you didn't know before. Yeah. And I feel like this is now the second time I've heard you talk about your trip to Ireland. You were a guest on Fated Mates this week.
Right.
I feel like one of the most remarkable things about this book is that it feels like you did learn something about yourself from this.
Yeah.
Which isn't true about every book.
No, it's not. This is probably my most personal book. What I learned about myself was that, what did I learn? Well, I mentioned I was the middle of three sisters. My older sister passed away some time ago. My younger sister is 14 months younger, and we could not be more different. But we are not estranged. I love my little sister Patty, but she is a little bit like Therese. I was a good sister, the rule follower, the person who was afraid to act up, well, mostly afraid. And Patty was the one that would do anything, say anything. She was an actress. She was incredibly smart, way smarter than me. And she was the one, who stole my clothes and dropped cigarette ashes on them, and hid her baggie of weed in my pillowcase, and did the things that I never would have dared to do. But the difference is that we, I hope, long ago accepted how our differences made us better. Two of us together, our differences, brought us together. She lives in England, so I don't get to see her as often as I'd like. But she married a guy she met at an RAF guy, and has lived all over Europe. So, the research teaches you about you. It teaches me that, I think it taught me that I did come from an incredibly strong maternal line. Now, the book, Mary Ellen was my father's mother, but my own mother was definitely the boss of the hill. And
well, she was Miss Kentucky.
She was. And she was
can't be that many of those.
Yeah, and she was the youngest of three sisters too. So, but when I got to Russborough House, with really not an idea of what was going to happen with this portrait, the guy took us into this beautiful big portrait hall and was explaining that all of these works of art were in fact old masters and were part of the former owner's collection, but that many of the most valuable pieces had been were being displayed in the National Gallery in Dublin, because in the 1970s there was an IRA art heist at Russborough House. And
now you're singing my song.
Yeah, because she loves to write about thieves.
I love a scoundrel. I love one.
She's got a whole series about Regency pickpockets, and
I mean they're like more than pickpockets. They would be offended.
They're badass bitches.
Oh yeah, well there is a vigilante girl gang, and there are men who smuggle things in ice, actually.
Yeah.
But go on. So IRA art heist.
So she says there was an IRA art heist, and they stole about 14 of the most valuable paintings. Now the person who had left these paintings to the Lord and Lady had made a fortune in the South African diamond mining. And so he had, old masters, all kinds of stuff. But in the mid-70s, during the Troubles in Ireland, the Lord and Lady were watching the BBC. There was a knock at the door. The butler went to the door, and a woman was standing there speaking something like fractured French. And before he could answer her, behind her burst these IRA guys. They pistol whipped the butler, they tied up the lord and the lady, and they made off with about over a dozen of the most valuable paintings. Now, this was not the most intelligent IRA crew. They got caught within a few days. They were holed up in a rented cottage up in the Wicklow Mountains, and they got caught. Their plan was some of their gang members had been arrested in a bombing in Belfast, where people had been killed in a post office bombing. So their plan was to ransom the art and for cash, and also to force the government to release their colleagues. But unfortunately, or fortunately, they got caught within 2 or 3 days. And it turns out that the woman who was there, who burst into the house first, she was a woman named Rose Dugdale, and she was from her parents were very wealthy and English. She was quite bright and wanted to go to Oxford and study chemistry, and her father refused, as a good father would in that time, and said, no, you're going to make your debut and then you're going to marry well and go on your way. And Rose pushed back. She made her debut, but she also went to Oxford, where she got radicalized, and she fell in with these.
Patty Hearst.
Yeah, she was like the Patty Hearst of Ireland at the time. And you can actually, there's a documentary about Rose Dugdale. It's really, I found it completely fascinating. So while the guide was telling all this, I said, what about all the paintings? Were they all recovered? And she said, well, yes, they were all recovered, and they all are now, the most valuable ones are now hanging in the National Gallery. And I said, so all of them? She said, well, for a long time there were rumors that a couple pieces maybe were hidden and never recovered. And as soon as she said that, I thought, okay, now I have an idea of what happens with this plot. And the sisters, of course, kind of have to follow through with that.